Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel Religion and Politics in South Europe, Encounters and Clashes, organized by the International Association of Religion Journalists. As you know, it is a global network of journalists promoting excellence in the coverage of religion and spirituality. This is not our first panel. The last one was about Africa. Now we are talking about South Europe, and the next one will be about North America. You can watch all that on YouTube and check it also on our webpage. Politics and religions, encounters and clashes, that is one of those topics which are almost always actual, but especially in the time of crisis. And unfortunately, we have a kind of crisis in recent periods, and pandemic and migrant crisis. And those topics need to be reflected constantly and also observed and analyzed in comparative perspective. And that is what are we doing now. And what I find also important that we are including this, our media perspective as well. Shortly, I'm coming from the region of former Yugoslavia, now called Western Balkan, because why Western Balkan? Because geography is not neutral in a sense that geographical level is also connected with the politics in some way. And this issue is very important between religion and politics in terms of history and recent history, and also it's I would say, the burning one. For example, some year ago, the eparchies of the Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro held political changes in country after 3 decades of one family and one party at the top of the states, and so on and so on. Sometimes during our conversation, I will misuse my position as the moderator and jump into the chair of the speaker, but I will try not to do that too often because we have great speakers today. Here is Georgia Gleoudi. She's a consultant of a KAISID Interreligious Dialogue Center and religion blogger in Greece. She's interviewing the religious minority all over the country and raising awareness in this predominantly Orthodox country. She's also working towards religious literacy for adults. Also, Hendro Munsterman is the Vatican and Rome correspondent for the Dutch daily newspaper Netherlands Dagblad. He teaches religious studies and theology at universities in Lyon and Grenoble in France. And I have to say, I know Hendro from one conference in Vatican some now 6-7 years ago. And it's really nice to hear that now he's correspondent there. And Jonah Mandel is a reporter with AFP, Agence France Press in Jerusalem. Previously, he was religious affairs reporter, and he's one of the founder of the International Association of Religion Journalists. Yes, and I'm Jelena Ergačević. I'm a journalist in Belgrade Weekly, Serbia Weekly, Vreme, and also the European representative of the IARJ. So we don't have so much time, so I would like to start, and maybe to start from some more, let's say, general stance, and I would ask you to describe the relationship between dominant religious communities and politics in countries you work and live. So what are some kind of main points of conflicts, cooperation, points of intertwining, if there is, and how it officially sounds and how does it look on the terrain? So, Georgia, could you start?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me to discuss this very important topic, religion and politics, especially in my country, in Greece. I will start with an overview. According to the latest reports, 95 to 98% of the total population in Greece belongs to Greek Orthodox Church. Greek Orthodox Church is not the state church in Greece, but according to our constitution, it is the prevailing religion. And actually, Greeks have very strong ties with Greek Orthodox Church, as it is very connected to our religious and cultural identity. And also the church has very, very strong ties and connections with the government, either left or right. So this is very, very unique feature in our country. The church has a huge influence on all levels of society, and this affects heavily the power relationships and the power dynamics among the state, the church, and the society. For example, the religious leaders' salaries and the administrative staff salaries, as well as buildings, churches, buildings, activities. Some organizations are all funded by the government. And this caused a lot of debate and a lot of comparison with other European countries, especially after the financial crisis in 2010. Despite all these efforts to change the situation, this situation was never really challenged. The status quo remained the same. And this was especially due to the fear of politicians that the church would encourage people and mobilize them to go against the state's decisions. I would like to bring an example of how the church is so strongly connected to the state. My first example is the subject of religious education in Greece. The subject is start being taught in the first classes of primary school, of primary education. Children are 7 or 8 years old, and the subject is continued to be taught until the final class of high school. In addition to this, we have the issue of the public morning prayer, where the children follow the prayer. And the problem here is that the students who do not want to follow the subject, or who want to take exception from the subject because they belong to another religion, it is very difficult to take exemption. It goes from another committee to another committee, and they face many obstacles and challenges. And of course, the books focus almost exclusively on Orthodoxy. Students don't have the possibility, they don't have the chance to read about other religions, about interfaith dialogue. They don't have the chance to meet another religion, either physically or only in theory. So, as you can understand, we have less possibilities to interact with other religions and to face people from other religions or faiths with less skepticism. And especially in the pre-COVID era, it was a common phenomenon that classes or schools went to attend the Mass, to receive the communion, and in many cases we had some examples where some conservative or extremist, in rare cases, extremist Christian movements tried to infiltrate in the school settings and create fear and hate for other faiths. Every effort for changing this situation failed because many stakeholders didn't want to change it. The government, religious leaders, the church, parents, and of course teachers and students in some cases. So these close relationships between the church and the government can be also reflected in the name of the Ministry of Education, because the full name is Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs. And of course, I would like to mention the presence of military priests. We have priests who serve the army, and they are there for the pastoral and the emotional and spiritual support of soldiers and of army staff. And this is a very general overview of the relationship between the state and the church. Of course, if we would like to analyze it, we should stay here for days, but this is a general overview. If you want to focus now on the COVID and the refugee crisis, I would
no, maybe just to give some first that overview, and then we will go to those other topics, so we can somehow compare. And there were some very interesting points you gave, and I would like also to further just to further analyze it. Thank you very much, Hedro. Kendra, just it would be very useful if we would hear you. So turn on the microphone.
Okay, thank you very much. I was thanking you, Jelena, for inviting me, and happy to see you again after so many years already. So I'm talking from an Italian perspective. I'm a correspondent in Italy, but I work also in France, and these two countries are very different when we talk about the relation between church and state. You know, in France, there is a kind of what we call in English secularism, but it is a bad translation of what is laïcité in French. This very strict separation between church and state that has been founded in 1905 at the beginning of the 20th century, and that is still continuing its way, even if it has to be adapted to the new situations, where the big problem, if we could say so, is not coming from the Catholic Church anymore, but where the problem is how to integrate Muslim immigrants, most of them, but also new Muslims coming now, and French getting converted to Islam. So this is a big issue in the French situation. In the Italian situation, the situation is different. In Italy, there is 80% of the population is Roman Catholic, according to the latest numbers that I got. There is separation of church and state since 1948. So the Catholic Church is not a church state, not as in Greece, for example. But it is so dominant that the whole culture is completely Catholic, and so the links are very collaborative. Between church and state, there is a lot of collaboration. There is also, of course, influence, but it is never direct influence. So the church doesn't interfere in politics directly, but speaks out loudly on issues that the church wants to underline. And so here, in the recent times, since this pontificate of Pope Francis, the Argentine Pope that never really knew Italy, even if he is from Italian descent, there are two interesting shifts that are going on in the way the Roman Catholic Church in Italy, but also globally, is handling these issues. The first shift, I would say, is that we have a shift on issues. Until 2013, the election of Pope Francis, the Roman Catholic Church would always say that bioethical issues, everything that is connected with sexuality and human life from beginning to end, would be the primary thing that we talk about. This is where all the political influence was aimed at. Since Pope Francis, the social ethical issues have been upgraded. Yeah. So there was always a kind of a hierarchy in the Catholic Church until now. Bioethical issues, everything that has to do with sexuality, life, birth, abortion, etc., was always much more important than social issues like refugees, migrants, poverty, etc. So this pontificate is really putting both at the same level. This is new, I think. This is the first shift. The second shift is very recent. I write about it in my newspaper on Saturday, so you have a scoop. But it's already published also in other media. The second shift is that it's a shift of methods. Yeah? Until now, the Roman Catholic Church very often would say that there is a kind of a method of prophetism. We have to speak clearly. We protect life. So abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, the voice of the church has to be clear and 100%. So now there is a shift going on where the Catholic Church realizes that even in societies as is Italy, where 80% of the people is Roman Catholic, they don't always follow the rules of the Catholic Church. They don't always agree with the ethical choices that the Catholic Church makes. And so there is a shift going on, and this shift means that from now on, the Catholic Church will be more and more pragmatical in his way of influencing politics. That means, very concretely, that at this moment, the Vatican is saying, okay, our fight against assisted suicide and euthanasia, we will lose it. So let's take the fight against euthanasia as a priority, and then we say about assisted suicide, okay, this is the lesser evil, but if we can have assisted suicide and protect from euthanasia, we will collaborate on the law on assisted suicide. This pragmatism is completely new in the approach of the Catholic Church towards this kind of politics, and this is really something that has to do with the pontificate of Pope Francis, who always thinks bottom up, more from reality to ideas, than the former popes that always were thinking from the ideas to reality. So this is maybe a first impression that I can give from the situation in Italy right now.
Thank you very much. It is very interesting, all what you said. And we will continue about that. I have already hundreds of questions, but okay. So, Jonah, now it's your turn.
Yeah, so Israel, I guess, is a bit similar to Italy and to Greece in the fact that there's a dominant religion as far as the size of the community. So I'd say about 75% of Israeli citizens are Jewish, another 20% or so Muslim, and another 5% Christian or undefined. And Israel, as you know, it was founded as the Jewish state. So like it's part of the identity, the national kind of DNA. There are things that have to do with personal life that take place that are under the authority or responsibility of religious institutions, whether Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. Things that pertain to personal life, for example, marriage, divorce, burial, all those things are by law, by Israeli secular law, under the responsibility of the religion of the person who wants to get married, wants to die, wants to get divorced, in that order. So, so on the one hand, you have a very kind of dominant presence of religion in people's personal life. But on the other hand, the state isn't a religious state. There's no law forcing people to observe religious laws, except for very kind of a few cases. For example, there's a prohibition on having bread in the public sphere over Passover. Passover is the Jewish holiday marking the exodus from ancient Jewish slavery in Egypt towards the Holy Land. And part of what Jews do on Passover is not eat bread or leavened products. And so Israel's law, secular law, says that you're not allowed to have bread in the public sphere. Now, of course, they don't enforce that in Arab or Christian areas, and there's a lot of controversy over if such a law should exist or not. But that's just to show that this kind of issue, it's kind of present in public life, but that's more of the exception that teaches about the rule. Now, what's happened currently in Israel is a bit interesting because for the first time ever, there's a prime minister who is religious, a practicing religious Jew, Naftali Bennett. And ironically or not, practicing Jews care more about the religious laws that exist in parallel to the secular laws. And what Naftali Bennett, or a member of his coalition, his party, what they're doing now is they're trying to take on some inherent flaws in the structure of Israel's chief rabbinate, the way it does kosher supervision over food, the way it carries out conversions to Judaism. And part of that is because, like I said, these people are observant, Bennett and the minister in charge of it, who's trying to carry out these reforms. And part of it has to do with the fact that there's no ultra-Orthodox parties in the government's coalition now, which is a change to previous governments where there's two major ultra-Orthodox Jewish parties. And for a lot of time, they were part of the coalition, and now they're not. So it's as if that the non-ultra-Orthodox Israeli political parties have an opportunity to make changes in the ultra-Orthodox organization, the chief rabbinate, that kind of controls things. And they're getting into a lot of controversy and a lot of backlash from ultra-Orthodox members who are saying you're ruining not only Judaism, but the entire Jewish race. And so that's kind of what is happening now in Israel. And but all in all, I mean, there's this kind of fine balance, like most of the 75%, I mentioned 75% of Israel are Jewish. Most of them would not define themselves as practicing Jews per se. There's the ultra-Orthodox, maybe 10% or so, the Orthodox, modern Orthodox, maybe another 10 to 20%, depending on your definitions, and another big chunk of Israelis who define themselves as traditional. So that means that they, they observe to some extent, things that they like more, traditions, but they don't see themselves bound to all of, the Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox, of course, rules and ways of life. And I would say, as long as there's not this feeling that the state or the state's religious institutions are trying to impose too much on, normal day-to-day lifestyle, there's not too much of a pushback, because most people are tolerant and kind of like their religion. I'm talking about the Jews here, of course. And there's usually like this okay coexistence and balance, but now there's kind of an interesting point in history where religious politicians are trying to change the religious ultra-Orthodox establishment to make it more suitable to Israeli society, which is, most of it isn't ultra-Orthodox. And they're saying, why should the religious laws be ultra-Orthodox when most of us aren't ultra-Orthodox, and it doesn't fit with the way the state, the secular state, should function. So that's kind of like a bit about that, about your question, Yelena.
Thank you very much. We see how it is a vivid question, and how it is actually nuanced, and it's complex, and from all sides it should be observed. And there are many questions that actually came to my mind now, also considering the real influence of the religious representatives in the countries we talked about. What if they would say tomorrow, do that and that to believers, or obey to that and that? How they would really, society, how would they really act or react? Of course, there are a high level of trust in churches, in the church or religious community, and there is that what we talked about, that high level of intertwining between society and culture and religiosity. But what do you think when we speak about really state on the terrain, how it is? What is that real influence that the religious representative in these questions could use if they would want, probably, maybe? Georgie, if you want, and then Kendra.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, to be honest, the influence is really huge, because, and this is where I wanted to talk about COVID. This is a real case study for exploring this relationship, because especially after, in their sermon, in Sunday masses, or when they talk to the people in the church, their influence is really huge. Let's see the COVID case. When the COVID started, people would like to go to the church, but they were really afraid because we have these restriction measures. So they didn't know what to follow the state regulations and laws, or to follow their faith. So the state asked from the church to tell people to stop going to the masses and close the doors and stop receiving the communion, etc. But the religious leaders, a very big percentage of religious leaders, especially in small parishes, in small churches, and in remote areas, they asked from the believers to fight against the state, to be, to have their revolution and still go. Even, it was like they were going, they were trying to hide in the doors, and so nobody could see them. And this happened also in the vaccination campaign. When the vaccination started, the state asked from the people and asked from the religious leaders, from the official Greek Orthodox Church, to support the vaccination. And indeed, the official church supports the vaccination. In many churches, the priests call the public authorities, doctors, nurses, so after the Sunday Mass, they can offer the vaccine. And indeed, people follow their advice. And they also ask them to have trust in state, to follow the medical advice, to support this effort for the public health. However, we have many cases where priests tell them not to get the vaccine, And there are many cases where priests tell them that if they do the vaccine, they have the vaccine, they will offer their soul to the devil. So they scare them. And what is most worrying is that many young people believe in what they say. And here is the tricky thing. We have a diversity, we have a contradiction between the official church and some other priests, and who has to follow whom. And we see that the official church never says anything like, I don't want to have trouble with them. They can do whatever they want. They can say whatever they want, and let's leave it. So yeah, the same happened with refugee crisis. A lot of hate speech, hate comments. We have the same with other churches, with other faiths. But to be honest, I'm not sure if there is the media representation. I mean, the media here don't always show the bad thing, the bad side of the church. So yes, I think this is the general the overview. People follow what the church says.
And sorry, Jerry, when you say that media, how to say, turns one blind eye on some kind of bad trends within the church, and yes, and maybe this lack of this multi-views within the church, you think that they follow most this kind of official statements the church gave, or in which kind you're thinking that, or just
Yeah, they prefer to show the stance of the official report of the church, which is aligned with the guidelines from the government, which is, of course, it is a good thing. I mean, we have a positive relationship between the church and the state, but yeah, they prefer not to show. There are, of course, some exceptions. They show what happens, but yes, in general, they prefer to show that there is an alignment between the church and the state.
Mm-hmm. There is, yes, we in Serbia for a long time, also during the pandemic, have had that kind of black and white media images of the church. So from one side, it is, as you said, everything is positive. Church is seen as a guardian of national identity, so don't question it. You know, that just leave it like that, and always. And from the other side, you have that that attitude that the church is totally backward, guilty for a lot of things. And for example, when it comes to the pandemic, the church teaches there was a kind of taxes that were problematic from many points of view. That was, I would say, totally also without nuances. And what happened actually, of course, that it wake a stronger resistance on the both sides. They're starting to be more harsher, one and other side. So there are less of those reports that are giving some context and more complex maybe view on the issue. I would say that it's quite similar in Serbia. Yes. And
before finishing, actually, the government had a lot of many rounds of negotiations and discussions with the official church to persuade them to embrace the vaccination campaign. So yes, it was very difficult. Like, please persuade them, encourage them to come and get the vaccine. It took many weeks or even months for reaching an agreement.
Yes, and it showed how in this crisis periods the role of religion actually is. And Hendro, it's always also a very significant question of how Catholic Church, how Pope Francis acted during the pandemic and during also migrant crisis, and how it reflected or it didn't reflect to some countries that, for example, claimed that I remember Orban, who in the same day who were had totally anti-Muslim narrative, and in the same day Pope Francis said something which was totally the opposite. But okay, let's focus on Italy or whatever you would like.
Yeah, I think that there's a difference to be underlined between Eastern Orthodox countries and Western Christianity. I think the link between religion and state in the Orthodox tradition is much stronger than in the Western tradition. But of course, there is a lot of cultural influence, and for the very easy reason that if 80% of the population is Catholic, the voice of the Catholic Church is counting. But in the same time, and this is very interesting, at the same time, the Catholic Church makes everybody unhappy because because on many issues, the Catholic Church is seen as conservative, right-wing, when it is about abortion, sexuality, euthanasia, LGBT issues. But at the other side, the Catholic Church is very left-wing when it is about migration, about poverty, about economics. So on the political level, there is no party, there are almost no parties that will recognize themselves in what the Catholic Church says. So you, as a political party, you cannot, it's very difficult to say that you support the voice of the Catholic Church because you're either right-wing or left-wing most of the time. Yeah? And so this is a huge problem for politicians. But this, at the same time, this gives the Catholic Church a lot of freedom, you know. So I think there is we cannot talk anymore about a direct authority. People think less and less that we should listen to the Pope because he is the Pope. You know? This legal authority has been replaced in our postmodern societies by moral authority. And I think Pope Francis is one of the very few moral authorities that we have on this planet at this moment. So his voice counts much less and less and less because he's the Pope, but because what he says is seen and considered as true, as morally good, as authentic, etc. So this moral authority of the Catholic Church has been much more increased with this pontificate. But there is a parallel church also, because in Italy, for example, there is a lot of moral authority also in Catholic institutions, like I mentioned Sant'Egidio. And Sant'Egidio is a Catholic movement, lay movement, also a few priests there, but many lay people, and they do a lot when it is about welcoming refugees, helping poor, helping homeless. They are very active in Rome, but elsewhere in Italy and elsewhere in the world. And so this is also a kind of a moral authority that plays a big role. When we talk about migrants, for example, you know, if Sant'Egidio is able to get migrants from Lesbos and other Greek islands to Italy, and they can show that the integration can succeed, there is a moral authority that works, and people see this happening. You know, so I think this is also a very interesting shift in our postmodern society. The authority is not more in the function of the person that talks, but on the side of what the person says and does concretely in daily life.
Thank you very much. Just what Alejandro mentioned on the beginning, I could not agree more with what you said. Just what you mentioned at the beginning, that yes, the Orthodox countries have kind of a more intense relationship to the state than the Catholics one. Yes, and even in their name, they're national churches. That is one. And second, in the majority of Orthodox countries in Europe, not all, the secularization was forced. That was not some kind of social natural processes. It came with communism, and it was forced. So when the situation changed, the comeback of religion was also different. So those are some probably nuances that we have to have in our mind. And sorry, yes, just interrupt.
No, it's very good. No, I agree. Maybe I could add something. That doesn't mean that religion doesn't play a very important role on the culture. For example, and we see in Italy that extreme right movements like Lega, Salvini uses Christian symbols to attract voters. This is much less about religion than it is about identity. When people fear for their identity, these kind of symbols work as something that is reassuring people about who they are. We see the same thing in France. You know, if you do polls in France on what religion people belong to, many people in France still say that they are Christian or Catholic. But just after terrorist attacks done by people that call themselves Muslims, the number of people that call themselves Christian or Catholics is increasing. And then it's going down again until the next attack, and then it increases again. So religion, even in Western countries, is very much also functioning as an identity issue.
And
people are not
Poland,
very.
Yes, in Poland or Croatia, it is very striking. Poland, for example, Croatia, very striking examples of that. Yeah. And actually, the situation during pandemic, I tried to compare something. It was quite similar in Christian countries. It was not such a big difference from one perspective, as it maybe it we suppose that it would look like. Sorry, Jonach, I haven't forgotten you. So we started this round with the stance of the dominant church or religious community in the period of crisis, and how it corresponds with their connection with the governments. And you started already saying something, so you could maybe give some further reflection.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic is a great leeway into this. In Israel, it was interesting because initially, like with other places with religious communities, the church, well, the synagogue, the Jewish religious authorities were very unhappy with the health ministry decrees to not go to synagogues. And I think there was a bit of undecisiveness on how to go ahead with this pandemic. Is it going to last? Do we need to change our lives? Because you know, the community, the synagogue is very important in Judaism. And when people realized that it was a big issue and synagogues closed down and schools closed down, and that created a huge crisis mainly in the ultra-Orthodox world, because a lot of the ultra-Orthodox families have low income and a lot of children, and the educational institutions basically are where their kids can be during the day because the houses are very small. That's also part of the reason that the numbers of the infections in those religious communities were so high in the beginning. So once the vaccinations began, the religious communities, the ultra-Orthodox communities and the chief rabbinate, they were like some of the biggest supporters of it. And they would go to, you know, like the big important rabbis, and they would have videos of them getting the vaccination, and they would say, it's a religious order, you have to get the vaccine. And they worked really hand in hand with the health ministry. The health ministry, of course, wanted the same thing. And I think they didn't disagree with science that, you know, that the vaccinations were a way to decrease morbidity and fatalities. But for them, it was really a crucial issue of maintaining the integrity of their communities, because without the religious institutions, the schools and the synagogues, things were kind of falling apart. People were, you know, becoming less religious, and there was less authority to the rabbis. So they really adopted the state's stance on the importance of the vaccines. And they've really been working with the health ministry. And of course, you always have people within those communities who are suspicious of those rabbis, suspicious of the health ministries and everything. But as a general direction, the religious communities really went along with the health ministry, in part because normally that's like, you know, they don't try to pose an alternative to the scientific community traditionally, but also, or mainly, because they were afraid of the integrity of their communities of believers.
Thank you very much. Georgia just wanted to add something, and so, yes.
I wanted to add something, a comment to what Kendra said, because I remember when the current ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew and the Pope Francis went to Lesbos. It is important to highlight that the Greek Orthodox Church didn't visit the island. It was Bartholomew who visited and went to Pope Francis. And this is not, it was not the stance of the Greek Orthodox Church, because officially we have no ties with the patriarchate. We have only spiritual ties. So it was not like Greek Orthodox supported this activity, this action. It was like only Bartholomew did it. So yes, it is. I just wanted to highlight that.
No, thank you very much, Georgia. Yeah, if I can read, I have been to Lesbos myself, and I met the Orthodox bishop on Lesbos. You know, Lesbos is an Orthodox island, largely, and the people on Lesbos are suffering at the same time on their way as the refugees that arrive on this island. So what was very striking to me is that the Orthodox Church on the island is also so busy with helping the own people, yeah, that in a way, if I can say so, they let the help for the refugees to the other churches, the other organizations, the NGOs. And what is very much striking, that the organization that is helping the refugees on the island, done by volunteers from the island, they are mostly non-religious, yeah, or from religious minorities. It are the communists and the Catholics on the islands that founded an organization, Sini Paraksi, and that helped the refugees. So this is very striking. It was very striking to me, but I seem to notice that you agree with me on this. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And if you can imagine that Lesbos is an island where people are really supportive, and I think that they welcomed the refugees. Like the situation in other islands of the Aegean Sea was totally different. They were more hostile. So yes, I think that the biggest part of the support is coming from other churches and from organizations from other churches.
Sorry for interrupting. It's really enjoying to listen. That I really like how it's. And Hendro wanted to say something, and you could say in one sentence.
One sentence. I think that as other Europeans, we don't understand that the Greek people is also suffering from this refugee crisis. Yeah? And this is something that we don't realize enough in other parts of Europe. And the same is also true for parts of Italy. Italy also does a lot on refugee welcoming. And when I see to my own country, the Netherlands, for example, or other Northern European countries, I think there should be really a new awareness about the situation where we put Greece, but also Italy, for example, in.
We opened a lot of questions, and I'm terribly sorry that we have just this time period, and I hope that we will have really some another panels to continue this. So just maybe, because we have time just for some short answers, as we are all journalists, could you just give me some kind of the strongest challenges when we talk about this topic, religion and politics, in your reporting as a media professional? So who would maybe Jonach first?
That's a good question. I was hoping the others would answer first, so I'd had time to think about it. But
okay, then Hendro first. Then
okay.
Go on.
So is Hendro
Georgia, okay, Georgia started that with saying that there's sometimes, because of this, in our countries, maybe for these tight connections, it is hard to write these nuanced articles, and then sometimes it's so everything is wide because of that. So Georgia, can you just maybe you can talk about that and continue?
Okay, so many challenges, but the first thing that I would like to say is because actually I'm reporting on religious minorities. And I would say that my biggest challenge is the hate comments. When I publish an article, I receive so many hate comments below my articles. So I have to deal with them, and I have to give the courage to continue. And I wonder why does this happen? I mean, the biggest challenge is to create an article that will cause a debate, but not so much debate. So I'm not sure what to do. And my second challenge is the fear, because I face a lot of fear from people to talk to me, to admit their own fears, to say what they need, to speak about their needs, their own challenges, their own relationship with the state or the dominant region. And these are the challenges. I still try to find ways to overcome these obstacles. In 10, 15, 20 years, we will talk again.
Thank you very much for this very nice and very, very good reflection. And I hope that sometime we will have a time to speak just about that, about the question of tolerance and this relationship state, dominant religion, minority religion, and journalists, because it's a very, very important issue. Thank you, Georgia. Hendro? Microphone is a...
I think he's pointing to me. Me?
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Sandro.
Thanks, Georgia, for your answer gave me time, but also helped me focus on what I think. I'll just talk about myself because that's the easiest. When I report on a religious issue, I think my challenge is to keep in mind that even if it looks strange to me, or even if the people who are behind it, their motivations don't seem clear or clean religious, to keep in mind that most of the religious community is comprised of people who sincerely believe in that religion, and to keep that in mind, the importance of that religion, of that faith, to the people who are part of the community that I'm writing about, because sometimes you overlook it and you get a bit cynical because you see how things work behind the scenes. But to the actual person who goes to church or goes to synagogue, to them it's a very, very important and key factor of their identity. And so yeah, that's my challenge, to remember that all the time.
Very nice also. Yeah, I think that we all can to some extent relate to what everyone of us said, actually. And Kendra?
Yeah, well, I had three challenges in mind. The first is that we live in a world in secularized countries like the Netherlands, Germany, Northern Europe. There is a lot of unawareness about the role of religion in religious countries. And this is something that we really suffer from. The whole situation in Ukraine and Russia today cannot be understood if you have no idea about the religious roots of it. So as a religious journalist, I have to fight against this analphabetism, this religious analphabetism that in many secularized countries we are completely in. This is the first thing I think. The second issue is it is very difficult to distinguish between what is religious and what is cultural. So this is something that I always have to keep in mind when I write. And the third thing would be, and this is also what Jonah said before, I think, religion for a religious person is not an opinion. It's much more than an opinion. It's an identity. This is we have to take care of, but it also means that when we write something and when we analyze something, and this is what Georgia said also, I think, we can have very strong reactions because people feel attacked in their identity, in their opinion, but much more than their opinion. That doesn't mean that we don't have to write. We should write and we should analyze, but we have to be very tough in our own jobs and very good in our skin as a journalist to be able to receive these reactions and not to get frustrated over it, because they will come because we touch on issues on topics that are really to do with personal and collective identity.
Thank you very much for all of your answers. You all mentioned some very crucial words. It's knowledge, responsibility, trust, sensibility, self-reflexivity, being empathic. So it's not easy. You're doing a good job. We are all trying to do it. Thanks again. For me, it was very interesting. I'm sure that we will meet again on some panels on Zoom, and I hope also in person finally. And our panel will be available on YouTube, so others can watch it. And I hope have some constructive comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.